In the Gilded Age of London society, where a name was worth more than gold and a marriage was a contract of power, one man dared to seek the truth. He was Andrew Stirling, the newly ascended Duke of Northwood, a man with a title coveted by all, yet a heart trusted by none. To escape the web of deceit and flattery, he did the unthinkable. He shed his title, his silks, and his name, becoming a lowly footman in the house of his own intended bride. He sought to discover the heart of the woman he was bound to marry, Lady Isabel Dortney. But in the shadowed halls and quiet whispers of her home, the truth he uncovered was not a treasure, but a dagger. This is the story of what he heard, and how it shattered his world, only to rebuild it anew. The year is 1818. London was a city of stark contrasts, a sprawling behemoth of glittering ballrooms and soot-choked alleys, of immense wealth and desperate poverty. At the apex of this glittering world sat Andrew Stirling, the 8th Duke of Northwood. At 28, he was not a man who had sought the title. It had been thrust upon him 6 months prior by a fatal riding accident that claimed his father, a man Andrew had respected but scarcely known. The suddenness of his father's death had left Andrew reeling, not just from grief, but from the abrupt collision with a destiny he had always observed from a polite distance. He had been content as a younger son, serving with distinction in the Peninsular War, finding a purpose in the disciplined chaos of military life that the rigid formality of ducal existence could never provide. The war had forged him, sharpening his instincts and hardening his resolve, but it had also instilled in him a profound distrust of facades and empty promises. With the title came the sprawling estates, the incalculable fortune, and a weight of expectation that felt like a lead mantle. The Northwood lineage stretched back centuries, a tapestry woven with threads of power, duty, and tradition. Andrew felt its heavy pull, a suffocating force that threatened to extinguish the man he had become. Every decision, every pronouncement, was scrutinized by a legion of tenants, retainers, and an eager, gossiping society. He found himself constantly performing, playing the part of the stoic, capable duke, a role for which he felt utterly unprepared and deeply resentful. The true Andrew, the soldier who valued honesty and directness, felt increasingly imprisoned by the gilded cage of his new existence. Chief among these expectations was marriage. The London season was in full swing, a relentless parade of balls, soirees, and assemblies, each more dazzling and tiresome than the last. Every drawing room he entered buzzed with the names of eligible young ladies, their mothers eyeing his ducal coronet with undisguised avarice. He saw through their calculated smiles and carefully rehearsed courtesies, recognizing the maneuvers of seasoned strategists in the matrimonial battlefield. He was a prize, an asset, a means to elevate a family's standing or secure its future, never a man to be known for himself. This cold reality chafed at his spirit, feeding the cynicism that had taken root during his soldiering days. His father's final correspondence had all but sealed his fate. A marriage contract, negotiated years ago between their families, bound him to Lady Isabel Dortney, the eldest daughter of the Earl of Athetherton. Society spoke of her in reverent tones. She was the Athetherton diamond, praised for her classical beauty, her unimpeachable grace, and her serene composure. She was, by all accounts, the perfect duchess, the embodiment of aristocratic poise and duty. And that, precisely, was what troubled Andrew. Perfection, he had learned, was often a meticulously crafted illusion, a shield against the probing eyes of the world, or worse, a weapon to manipulate it. "Perfection is a mask, Giles," he said one evening, staring into the crackling fire of his study in Northwood House. He swirled the amber brandy in his glass, the firelight glinting off the cut crystal. The room, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, now felt like another stage for his performance. Books lined the walls, rich tapestries depicted ancient battles, and ancestral portraits gazed down with stern, unblinking eyes. He felt their collective weight, their silent expectation. Mr. Phineas Giles, his valet of 10 years, a man whose loyalty was as starched and reliable as his collars, stood by the mantelpiece. Giles was a study in dignified discretion, his movements precise, his expression unreadable, yet his presence offered Andrew a rare comfort. He was one of the few people who had seen Andrew through his various guises, the unruly younger son, the disciplined officer, and now the reluctant Duke. "A mask, Your Grace," Giles echoed, his voice a low, unobtrusive murmur. "A performance," Andrew clarified, his voice low, heavy with a weariness that rarely showed in public. "I have spent the last 6 months being suffocated by performances, the simpering debutantes, the flattering lords, the grieving relatives who suddenly recall a deep and abiding affection for me now that I am Duke. They don't see a man, they see a title, a vault, a key to their own ambitions. I am told Lady Isabel is the most polished performer of them all, the epitome of ducal grace." He took a long swallow of brandy, the liquid burning a path down his throat, but doing little to quell the bitter fire in his soul. "Society whispers of her impeccable breeding, her flawless manners, her exquisite beauty. But what lies beneath? Another empty shell, perfected by years of training." Giles adjusted his spectacles, a subtle shift in his posture betraying a slight discomfort at his master's cynicism. "The young lady comes from a most respected lineage, Your Grace. The Dortneys are ancient stock." "Ancient," Andrew countered, a cynical edge to his tone, "and if my solicitors are to be believed, financially precarious. Lord Athetherton has a ruinous affection for the faro tables at White's and a penchant for ill-advised investments. This marriage is not a union of hearts, Giles. It is a bailout. I am to be her salvation, and she is to be my ornament, a beautiful, biddable duchess to sit at the head of my table and produce heirs. I refuse to be shackled for life to a beautiful, empty shell who desires my fortune, not my fellowship. I have seen enough calculating ambition in the drawing rooms of Mayfair to last me a lifetime." A silence settled in the room, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the distant mournful hoot of an owl. Andrew stared into the flames, seeing not the comforting glow, but a reflection of his own isolation. An idea, audacious and utterly insane, had been taking root in Andrew's mind for weeks. It was a desperate gamble, a flight of fancy, born from a deep-seated loneliness he rarely acknowledged, a longing for something genuine in a world of artifice. The memory of his days in the peninsula, where rank mattered less than courage, where camaraderie was forged in shared danger, haunted him. He missed the raw honesty of that life. "I will not meet her as a duke," he declared suddenly, placing his glass down with a decisive click that resonated loudly in the quiet room. Giles' eyebrows shot up, a rare visible display of surprise. "Your Grace, I want to see her as she truly is." "Giles," Andrew continued, his voice gaining momentum, a dangerous glint entering his grey eyes. "Not when she is performing for a suitor, not when she's on display for society, but when she is within the walls of her own home, with her family, when she believes herself unobserved. I want to see the woman behind the mask, or confirm that there is no woman at all, only the mask." He turned to face his valet, his eyes alight with a reckless energy that Giles recognized from Andrew's more daring military campaigns. "You will write to the Earl of Athetherton's steward. You will inform him that Northwood House is sending over a junior footman to assist with the preparations for my formal visit next month, a gesture of goodwill. He is to be trained in their ways, so that the households might merge seamlessly after the wedding." Giles paled, his composure momentarily faltering. "Your Grace, you cannot be suggesting—" "I am," Andrew said, a grim smile touching his lips. For 1 month I will cease to be the Duke of Northwood. I will be Alec. Just Alec, a footman. I will see and hear everything. I will learn the true state of the Athetherton finances, the character of its inhabitants, and most importantly, the heart of the woman I am to marry. And then I will know the truth. The plan was madness. It was a breach of every conceivable protocol, a risk of colossal scandal that could ruin not only him, but the Dortney family. Andrew knew this. But the alternative, a lifetime of polite deception with a woman he suspected of being as cold and calculating as himself, felt like a far greater risk to his very soul. He had to know. He had to be sure. Giles, seeing the unshakable resolve in his master's eyes, knew it was useless to argue. He had seen this look before, the quiet determination that had made Andrew a respected officer in the Peninsular War, before the ducal coronet had called him home. With a sigh that spoke volumes of his apprehension and unwavering loyalty, Giles bowed. As you wish, Your Grace, but I implore you, exercise the utmost caution. Such a deception, if discovered. It will not be discovered, Giles. Andrew interrupted, his voice firm. My days as Alec will be brief, but they will be definitive. Begin the arrangements at once. And so, 2 weeks later, the Duke of Northwood's gleaming black carriage, emblazoned with the ducal crest, rolled away from the grand entrance of Athetherton Manor. It left behind a tall, broad-shouldered young man, dressed in plain, ill-fitting livery. His aristocratic hands, unused to labor, were raw and awkward. His posture, usually ramrod straight, was consciously stooped. His tailored coat, exchanged for a coarse borrowed wool, felt alien and itchy. Andrew had spent days with Giles, learning the rudiments of a footman's duties, how to polish silver without scratching, how to carry a tray laden with delicate china without a tremor, how to melt into the background, a silent, invisible presence. It was harder than he had anticipated, a performance of a different, more physically demanding kind. Andrew Sterling, master of 3 counties and countless souls, took a deep breath of the damp country air, a scent of wet earth and distant wood smoke replacing the familiar London smog. He adjusted the ill-fitting jacket and reported to the servants' entrance, a side door usually reserved for deliveries and tradesmen, a gateway to a world entirely separate from the one he commanded. He was met by a formidable, hawk-nosed housekeeper, a Mrs. Davies, whose keen eyes seemed to miss nothing and judge everything. She eyed his cheap boots and slightly too clean hands with undisguised disdain. "You're the lad from Northwood House, then? Alec, is it?" She sniffed, her voice sharp as she surveyed him from head to toe. "You've got the build for carrying coal scuttles at least, though your hands look soft enough to have never lifted anything heavier than a brandy snifter. Don't think, because you come from a duke's household, you'll be getting any special treatment here. You'll work twice as hard to prove you're not a London dandy, prancing about with airs and graces. We don't hold with that here. Now come along. The morning silver needs polishing, and there's a stack of firewood that needs hauling from the woodshed. And wipe that look off your face, boy. This isn't a holiday." As he was led through the labyrinthine corridors of the servants' quarters, a world away from the gilded rooms above, Andrew felt a strange sense of liberation. Here he was, nobody. His worth would be measured in the strength of his back and the silence of his tongue. The air was thick with the smells of roasting meat, lye soap, and damp stone. The passages were narrow, dimly lit, and teeming with a bustling, unseen populace of maids, cooks, stable boys, and scullery workers, all moving with a purpose he was yet to grasp. He learned quickly that the true engine of any great house hummed below stairs, a complex, meticulously ordered machine that kept the illusion of effortless grandeur alive above. His first glimpse of Lady Isabel came that afternoon, several hours into his grueling new existence. He was tasked with the back-breaking work of weeding the neglected rose garden at the back of the manor. The house, he had noted, had an air of faded grandeur. The tapestries were magnificent, but threadbare in places. The furniture was elegant, but bore the nicks and scars of age. The manor itself, while still impressive, hinted at a past opulence that the present struggled to maintain. It was a house trying desperately to keep up appearances, much like its occupants. He suspected she walked out onto the terrace with her younger sister, Lady Beatrice, a frail, pale girl who leaned heavily on Isabel's arm. From his position below, partially hidden by a sprawling rhododendron bush, Andrew looked up. The portraits and society whispers had not done her justice. Lady Isabel Dortney was not merely beautiful. She was breathtaking. Her hair, the color of spun gold, was coiled in an elegant chignon, catching the muted afternoon light. Her profile was like that of a Roman empress on a coin, proud, noble, and perfectly sculpted. She moved with an innate grace, a fluidity that spoke of generations of careful breeding, but it was her eyes that held him. They were a deep, startling blue framed by long, dark lashes. And in them, he saw not the serene composure he'd been promised, not the cool indifference he'd expected, but a profound and unsettling weariness. It was a weariness that belied her youth, a subtle shadow beneath the surface of her beauty, as if she carried a burden far too heavy for her slender frame. Just a little air. Beatrice's, Isabel was saying, her voice a soft, melodic balm, barely audible above the rustle of leaves. The sun will do you good, even on such a cloudy day. It's so dull here, Belle, the younger girl complained, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to Isabel's richer tones. Will we ever go back to London? This house is always so quiet now. Isabel's smile was gentle, almost imperceptible, but her eyes scanned the crumbling balustrade of the terrace, then drifted over the vast, slightly overgrown gardens, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Soon, dearest. Once things are settled, everything will be better soon. I promise. Her gaze drifted over the gardens, and for a fleeting moment met Andrew's. He froze, his hands full of weeds, his face smudged with dirt, his heart hammering against his ribs. He expected a look of disdain, of dismissal, perhaps a sharp command for him to return to his place. Instead, her blue eyes held his for a second longer than was proper for a lady observing a servant. And he saw not arrogance, but a flicker of something else, a shared melancholy, a recognition of a fellow prisoner in a gilded cage, perhaps even a nascent curiosity. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment was gone. She turned her attention back to her sister, her mask of serene grace firmly back in place, leaving Andrew to ponder the brief, unsettling connection. Andrew's heart hammered against his ribs. The woman on the terrace was infinitely more complex than the one-dimensional gold digger he had imagined. But whether that complexity was a virtue or a more sophisticated form of vice, he had yet to discover. He returned to his weeding with renewed vigor, the physical exertion a welcome distraction from the churning questions in his mind. Life as Alec was a lesson in brutal humility. Andrew's days began before dawn, his body aching from sleeping on a thin straw mattress in a cramped attic room he shared with two other footmen, Thomas and George. Their rough camaraderie was a stark contrast to the deferential silence he usually received. He learned to appreciate the small comforts, a warm meal, a few moments of rest, the fleeting anonymity of the servants' hall. His hands, once accustomed to the soft leather of reins and the smooth wood of his dueling pistols, were now perpetually chapped and calloused from polishing silver, carrying firewood, and scrubbing floors. He learned the geography of the house through its underbelly, the stifling heat of the kitchens, where Mrs. Jenkins, the cook, ruled with a fiery temperament and a sharp cleaver. The drafty chill of the scullery, perpetually damp and smelling of grease. The endless stone corridors that snaked through the servants' domain, a hidden network beneath the polished floorboards of the grand rooms above. Most importantly, he learned the art of being invisible. He became part of the furniture, a silent presence whose job was to see and hear nothing, yet who, by his very nature, saw and heard everything. He mastered the footman's shuffle, a quiet, almost imperceptible movement that allowed him to enter and exit rooms without drawing undue attention. He learned to anticipate needs, to move without disturbing the delicate balance of aristocratic life. The servants' hall, a bustling, chaotic space, was a hotbed of gossip and information, a vibrant counterpoint to the hushed formality above stairs. Andrew, initially aloof, gradually learned to blend in, offering polite nods and brief, non-committal answers to the occasional questions. He learned that the Earl, Lord Athetherton, was rarely seen before noon, and often spent his nights locked in his study with a bottle of claret, his gambling debts a whispered stain on the family name. He heard the cook complaining about the butcher, refusing to extend their credit, a dire sign of financial distress, and the ladies' maids whispering about how Lady Isabel had been seen mending her own gowns, a task usually reserved for a highly paid seamstress. The picture being painted was one of quiet, desperate decline. The Dortneys were not just financially precarious, they were teetering on the edge of a precipice, and the entire household seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable fall. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on Andrew. Andrew's duties often placed him in the family's private quarters, a privilege he exploited with calculated discretion. It was there he began to observe Lady Isabel more closely, his earlier cynicism warring with a growing sense of unease. He saw her poring over the household account books with the steward, her brow furrowed in concentration, her questions sharp and intelligent, demonstrating a grasp of figures and management that surprised him. This was not the idle beauty he had envisioned. He saw her spending hours reading to her frail sister, Beatrice, her voice patient and kind, her touch gentle and reassuring. Beatrice, it seemed, suffered from a chronic lung ailment, requiring expensive medical care and periods of convalescence at the coast. This fact, gleaned from a hushed conversation between the housekeeper and a maid, added another layer to Isabel's burden. He saw Isabel manage her father, the Earl, with a delicate blend of respect and firm guidance, intercepting wine merchants, placating worried tenants, and handling correspondence with a diplomacy far beyond her 21 years. She was, in essence, running the household, patching the holes in their sinking ship with unwavering dedication. This was not the frivolous socialite he had anticipated. This was a woman holding her world together with sheer force of will, a quiet strength that was both admirable and profoundly moving. A part of him began to admire her, to feel a grudging respect that was dangerously close to attraction. He found himself watching for the rare moments when her guard would drop, a sigh of exhaustion when she thought she was alone, her shoulders slumping just slightly, a genuine, uninhibited laugh while playing with her sister's terrier on the lawn, a sound that brought a brief, welcome lightness to her face. These glimpses, however fleeting, offered tantalizing hints of the woman beneath the composure, but his admiration was tempered by a persistent, gnawing suspicion. He had come here to learn her true feelings about their impending marriage, and on that subject, she was an impenetrable fortress. Whenever the Duke of Northwood was mentioned, usually by the Earl with a forced cheerfulness or by Beatrice with an innocent curiosity, Isabel's face became a mask of cool, polite indifference, her expression carefully neutral, revealing nothing of her inner thoughts. This inscrutability, while admirable in its own way, fed Andrew's deepest fears. Was it true serenity or just an act? His fears were further stoked by a frequent visitor to the manor, Lord Philip Harrington. Harrington was a neighbouring baron, handsome, impossibly charming, and a close confidant of the family, particularly, it seemed, of Isabel. He treated Isabel with an easy, familiar affection that made Andrew's blood boil with an unfamiliar, primitive jealousy he immediately stifled. Harrington would bring her flowers, laugh with her on the terrace, and engage her in quiet, intense conversations that always ceased the moment a servant entered the room. Andrew noted the possessiveness in Harrington's gaze when he looked at Isabel, The way his hand lingered a fraction too long when assisting her, the subtle intimacy of their hushed exchanges. He was a rival, Andrew concluded, one who clearly held Isabel's affection. One afternoon, while clearing away the tea service from the morning room, Andrew lingered by the door, pretending to adjust a curtain, his ears straining. Isabel and Harrington stood by the window, their voices low, their backs partially turned. The light pouring through the tall panes illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, but failed to penetrate the shadows of their conversation. "It's the only way, Philip," Isabel was saying, her voice strained, her back to the door. "You know it is. The debts are insurmountable. We cannot continue like this." "There is always another way," Harrington insisted, his voice laced with emotion, his tone both persuasive and possessive. He reached out and touched her arm, his fingers lightly gripping her sleeve. "Isabel, to chain yourself to a man you do not know, a cold, austere stranger from all accounts, it is a life sentence. Are you truly prepared for that? For a lifetime of duty with no affection?" Andrew's hand tightened on the silver tray he held, the delicate china rattling slightly. Cold or austere stranger, was that how she saw him? The words stung with an unexpected ferocity. He felt a flash of wounded pride, quickly followed by a cold, familiar cynicism. "It is my duty," Isabel replied, her voice devoid of any warmth, a chilling echo of his own earlier pronouncement. She pulled her arm away from Harrington's grasp, a subtle but firm rejection. "The Duke's fortune will secure Beatrice's future and restore our family's honor. It is a price I am willing to pay, a necessary sacrifice. And your happiness." Harrington pressed, his voice softening, attempting to appeal to a deeper emotion. "Is that not part of the price? The joy you deserve?" Isabel turned fully to face Harrington, her posture rigid, her blue eyes distant. "Happiness is a luxury the House of Dortney can no longer afford, Philip. Not now. The Duke of Northwood understands transaction. This is a transaction. He requires a Duchess of suitable lineage, and I require his financial stability. It is a perfectly balanced equation." Andrew felt a cold knot form in his stomach, spreading through his chest. A transaction. A perfectly balanced equation. The words were like shards of ice in his veins, confirming his darkest suspicions. He had wanted the truth, and here it was, delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She wasn't a frivolous gold digger, swept away by dreams of grandeur. She was something far worse, something more profoundly disappointing. A pragmatic, calculating woman who viewed their union as nothing more than a commercial merger, a matter of cold, hard sums. All the budding respect, the nascent attraction he had felt, curdled into bitter resentment. He slipped away from the door, the clatter of the teacups on his tray, unheard over the roaring in his ears. He moved through the house in a daze, polishing and cleaning, his movements automatic. He had been a fool to hope for more. She was exactly what he had feared, a woman marrying his title, not the man. His cynical predictions had been proven correct, and the hollow victory offered no comfort, only a profound sense of loss for a future he had barely dared to imagine. His anger festered over the next few days. He performed his duties with a grim, silent efficiency that earned him nods of approval from Mrs. Davies, but isolated him from the other servants, who found his sudden intensity unsettling. He watched Isabel from the shadows, reinterpreting every action through the lens of her conversation with Harrington. Her kindness to her sister was now a calculated move to justify her sacrifice. Her diligence with the accounts was merely the act of a future CEO protecting her investment. Even her rare, beautiful laugh seemed to him now like a carefully crafted distraction, a momentary release before she returned to her steely resolve. The final crushing blow was yet to come. It would not be a whisper overheard in a corridor, but a clear, devastating pronouncement that would extinguish the last ember of hope in his heart, reducing it to cold ash. The library at Athetherton Manor was Lord Athetherton's sanctuary and his prison. It was a magnificent room, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books that hadn't been opened in a generation, their leather spines cracking with neglect. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper, pipe tobacco, and desperation. It was here the Earl drank away his dwindling fortune and his self-respect, seeking solace in the bottom of a glass. And it was here, one rain-lashed evening, that Andrew's fragile hope was irrevocably shattered. His task was simple: to build up the fire, draw the heavy velvet curtains against the storm, and then make himself scarce. The Earl was already seated, in his favourite wingback chair, a half-empty decanter of port at his elbow, his face florid and eyes bloodshot. Lady Isabel stood before him, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her back to the flickering fire. The tension in the room was as thick as the scent of old paper and beeswax, almost palpable. Andrew worked silently, his movements economical, honed by weeks of practice. He knelt at the hearth, stacking the logs with practiced care, his back to the two figures, yet acutely aware of every subtle shift in their demeanour, every strained breath. He was a ghost in the room, his drab livery, his invisibility cloak. He knew he should leave, that this was a private family matter, a sacrosanct boundary not to be crossed. But he was rooted to the spot by the terrible, compelling gravity of the conversation that was unfolding, a morbid curiosity compelling him to hear the end of his own story. "I have had another letter from Mr. Sterling's solicitor," the Earl slurred, his voice thick with drink and despair. He gestured vaguely with his glass, spilling a few drops of port onto the pristine Persian rug. He presses for a date. "The Duke intends to make his formal visit by the end of the month, to finalize arrangements." "I am aware, Father." Isabel's voice was steady, remarkably so, but Andrew, now attuned to its subtle cadences, could hear the strain beneath the surface, a tremor of controlled emotion. "He's a cold fish, they say," the Earl muttered, staring into his glass as if divining his future in the amber liquid. His father was the same. All business and duty, not a drop of warmth in the whole Sterling line. "He will be a difficult man to manage, Isabel. Unbending." Isabel's chin lifted a fraction, a barely perceptible gesture of defiance. "I will not need to manage him. I will be his Duchess. I will perform my duties, provide him with an heir, and manage his households. It is what is expected. It is what I have been trained for my entire life." Her voice was devoid of emotion, a chillingly precise recitation of facts. The Earl let out a pathetic, gusty sound, a mixture of a sigh and a sob. "It's my fault, all of it. I've sold you, my girl. I've sold you to the highest bidder to pay for my sins. Your mother would be heartbroken." A flicker of pain crossed Isabel's face, so quick Andrew might have missed it if he hadn't been watching so intently. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by that familiar, impenetrable composure. But when she spoke, her voice was glacial, cutting through the Earl's maudlin self-pity. "Let us not be sentimental, Father. It is done. This is not about your sins or my sacrifice. It is about survival. It is about ensuring Beatrice has the care she needs, that our tenants are not thrown from their homes, and that the Dortney name is not dragged through the mud of debtor's prison. It is about keeping what little dignity we have left." She took a step closer to the fire, her silhouetted form seeming to radiate a cold fury. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Andrew, still kneeling by the hearth, felt the heat on his face, a stark contrast to the chill in his soul. He had heard the words, but the way she spoke them, the raw, unvarnished truth, pierced him deeper than any insult. "Do you think I have any feeling for this man?" she continued, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper, intended for her father alone, but echoing with terrible clarity in Andrew's ears. "This Duke, this stranger I am to be bound to for the rest of my days. I feel nothing for him. He is a name on a piece of paper, a vault of gold, a solution to a problem. He is the means to an end. My duty is to our family, not to the man in my marriage bed. I will endure him, I will tolerate him, and I will use his power and his wealth to restore what you have lost. Love does not enter into it. It cannot. Every word was a hammer blow against Andrew's heart, shattering the last fragments of his carefully constructed hope. Endure him, tolerate him, a means to an end. He had stripped himself of his identity, humbled himself, worked until his body ached, all for a sliver of hope that there was a real woman, a real heart beneath the perfect facade. And here was the truth, laid bare in the firelight. The truth was uglier than he could have ever imagined. She was not just marrying his title. She despised the very idea of the man attached to it. He was an obstacle to be endured, a necessary evil for her family's salvation. He felt a sudden, violent urge to stand up, to throw off his servant's disguise and reveal himself. He wanted to see the shock on her face, to confront her with her own cold-blooded words, to watch her composure crack. But what would that achieve? It would only prove her right. He was a cold, austere stranger, spying on her from the shadows. A wave of nausea and fury washed over him, leaving him hollow. His hands trembled as he placed the last log on the fire, the wood hissing in protest. He rose to his feet, his movements stiff, his face a stony mask, careful to keep his back to them lest his expression betray him. Neither the Earl nor Isabel paid him any mind. He was just the footman, invisible, a part of the background as he had intended. He turned and walked out of the library, closing the heavy oak doors behind him with a soft, deferential click that belied the storm raging within him. He walked through the dark corridors, past the portraits of Isabel's ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to mock him, their stern expressions mirroring his own bitter disappointment. He didn't stop until he reached the damp chill of the servants' staircase, a place where he could finally be truly alone, truly unseen. There in the oppressive darkness, he leaned his head against the cold stone wall, the rough surface biting into his skin, a welcome physical pain against the torment in his mind. The heartbreak was a physical thing, a crushing weight in his chest that made it difficult to breathe. It was not the simple sting of rejection. It was the profound agony of having his deepest fears confirmed, of seeing the last vestiges of optimism extinguished. He had opened himself up to the possibility of finding a partner, a companion, a genuine connection, and had instead found a viper, albeit one driven by duty rather than greed. His mission was over. He had the truth he sought. Tomorrow he would send word to Giles. He would invent an excuse, a family illness, a sudden injury, a pressing matter requiring his immediate return to Northwood. And he would leave Atherton Manor forever. He would instruct his solicitors to find a way, any way, to break the marriage contract. Let the Dortneys fall into ruin. It was no longer his concern. He would return to his gilded cage, to his title and his solitude, and he would never again make the mistake of believing that a heart could be found behind a mask. He would build higher walls around himself, impenetrable and absolute. Andrew spent a sleepless night composing the letter to his solicitor in his head. It was a cold, clinical document, severing all ties, citing irreconcilable differences in character discovered through undisclosed channels. He would be magnanimous, of course. He would anonymously settle the most pressing of the Earl's debts, the ones that threatened immediate scandal or imprisonment, to avoid any public tarnish that might adhere to his own name by association. But the Dortney family would be cut adrift. Isabel would have her freedom and he would have his. It was a clean break, brutal in its efficiency but necessary. His decision hardened with each passing hour, calcifying into an unyielding resolve. The next morning he moved through his duties in a fog of numb resolve. His face was a stoic mask, mirroring Isabel's own carefully constructed composure. He avoided the main corridors, volunteering for the grimiest tasks in the cellars and stables, wanting only to remain unseen until he could orchestrate his departure. He felt a bitter, hollow satisfaction in his decision. He had been right all along. Trust was for fools. Vulnerability was a weakness to be exploited. He would never again be so foolish as to expose his heart. It was mid-afternoon when his carefully constructed world, built on the foundations of certainty and cynicism, was shaken by a small, unexpected tremor. He was tasked with carrying a heavy trunk filled with linens and winter clothes up to the attic for storage. The main staircase was being polished, so he was forced to use the narrower, winding servants' stairs at the back of the house, which led past the landing of the family's bedchambers. As he passed the landing, a soft sound from Lady Beatrice's room caught his attention. It was the faint, tinkling melody of a music box, a sweet, melancholic waltz, delicate and haunting. He paused, his breath held, the heavy trunk digging into his shoulder. The door to Beatrice's room was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the dim corridor. He knew he shouldn't look, that his purpose here was finished, that he should simply continue on his way. But an irresistible impulse, a lingering curiosity, made him glance through the crack. Beatrice was propped up in bed, her face pale and listless against the white pillows, her breathing shallow. Isabel sat on the edge of the mattress beside her, her back to the door, her golden hair catching the muted light from the window. She was holding a small, intricately carved rosewood music box, its polished surface reflecting the faint light. The melody, a poignant waltz, filled the quiet room, a fragile bubble of beauty in the otherwise bleak atmosphere of the manor. "It was Mamma's, wasn't it?" Beatrice whispered, her voice barely audible, frail as a butterfly's wing. "She would play it for us when we couldn't sleep." "Yes," Isabel said softly, her voice thick with suppressed emotion. "She would." She said the music chased away the shadows. "Do you remember?" "I miss her." Beatrice's eyes, large and shadowed, were fixed on her sister. "I know, my love. I do too," Isabel said, her hands stroking her sister's fine, pale hair, a gesture of profound tenderness. "But you must be strong now. You must take your medicine and get your rest. Dr. Anselm says the sea air in Brighton will do you a world of good." "But the physician in Brighton is so expensive," Beatrice fretted, a line of worry creasing her young brow, a wisdom beyond her years in her voice. "Papa said we couldn't afford it, not after his last losses." "Do not worry about Papa," Isabel interrupted, her voice firm but gentle, brokering no argument. "Everything is taken care of. I have seen to it. You will go to Brighton and you will get well. That is all you need to think about. That is all that matters." She closed the music box, and the melody ceased abruptly, leaving a sudden, echoing silence. For a moment, Isabel sat in silence, her shoulders slumped, the weight of the world seemingly pressing down upon her. Andrew saw her raise a hand to her face, and he thought he saw her wipe away a tear, a quick, furtive gesture. When she turned slightly to place the box on the bedside table, he saw her profile. The mask of serene control was utterly gone. In its place was a look of such profound love, pain, and bone-deep exhaustion that it struck him like a physical blow. This was not the cold, calculating woman from the library. This was a sister, terrified for the one she loved, willing to bear any burden, endure any sacrifice for her sake. His mind replayed her words from the previous night, the ones that had sounded so mercenary. "It is about ensuring Beatrice has the care she needs." He had heard those words, but he had filtered them through the lens of her supposed avarice, her transactional view of their marriage. Now seeing this raw private moment, witnessing the depth of her devotion, the words took on a profoundly different meaning. They were not an excuse. They were the entire, agonizing reason. He backed away from the door, his heart pounding a confused rhythm against his ribs, a dissonance between what he thought he knew and what he had just witnessed. He continued up the stairs, the heavy trunk now feeling weightless in his altered state of mind. He set it down in the dusty attic and stood by the small, grimy window that overlooked the grounds. The wind still howled, but now it sounded less mournful, more insistent, a voice of questioning. Had he misjudged her? No, he told himself firmly, trying to reassert his shattered certainty. The facts remained. She had said she felt nothing for him, that she would endure him. This moment of tenderness with her sister didn't change that fundamental truth. It only changed her motive. She wasn't driven by simple greed, but by desperate love. It was perhaps a nobler reason for her deception, for her willingness to enter a loveless marriage, but it was deception all the same. She was still planning to use him, to marry him under false pretenses, binding him to a loveless future for her family's salvation. And yet a seed of doubt had been planted, a small, insidious question that began to worm its way into his certainty, undermining the walls he had built around his heart. What would he do if their positions were reversed? If he had a beloved sibling whose life depended on a loveless marriage, could he honestly say he would act any differently? Could he condemn her for a choice he might very well make himself? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of another servant, a young, rosy-cheeked maid named Rose, who had joined the household shortly after him. "Alec," she said, slightly out of breath, "Mrs. Davies sent me to find you. Lord Harrington has arrived and his horse needs tending to. The grooms are both out mending a fence on the north pasture, and she said you were to see to it." A scowl darkened Andrew's face. Lord Harrington, the charming familiar friend, the man who seemed to be a permanent fixture at the manor. He felt a resurgence of the cold anger he had dismissed as mere jealousy. With a curt nod, Andrew descended the stairs and headed for the stables, the image of Isabel's tear-streaked profile still vivid in his mind. He took the reins of Harrington's magnificent black stallion, a beast of far better breeding and condition than anything in the Earl's dilapidated stables, a stark contrast that pricked at Andrew's observations of the Dortneys' financial straits. As he led the horse into a stall, he saw Harrington himself crossing the courtyard with Isabel. They were walking close together, Harrington's head bent toward hers in an attitude of intimacy that was clearly beyond mere friendship. Andrew's jaw tightened. He set about unsaddling the horse, his movements rough and angry, fueled by a renewed surge of suspicion, not just towards Isabel, but now more acutely towards Harrington. As he lifted the heavy leather saddle, a small folded piece of paper fell from one of the saddlebags. It must have been tucked inside carelessly, dislodged by the journey. Ordinarily, he would have ignored it. It was not his place, but his mind was a tempest of conflicting emotions, and a dark suspicion, a chilling intuition, was beginning to form around the ever-present Lord Harrington. He glanced around. The courtyard was empty, save for a few pigeons pecking at stray oats. His hands, though calloused, trembled slightly as he bent down and picked up the paper. He unfolded it. It was not a letter. It was a betting slip from a London gaming hell, one of the more disreputable ones in the city's underbelly, not the respectable establishments frequented by the gentry. And scrawled on it, alongside a list of wages, were two names. One was Lord Atherton's, the other was Lord Harrington's. And next to the Earl's name was a staggering figure, a debt so large it would indeed be insurmountable for a man of his means. It was not merely thousands, but tens of thousands of pounds, an amount that could cripple an estate, but it was the notation at the bottom that made Andrew's blood run cold. It was written in a different hand, a clerk's careful scroll. Lord. Is marker to be transferred to Lord H's account upon settlement. Andrew stared at the slip, the pieces clicking into place. Andrew's entire demeanor shifted. The sullen, withdrawn footman was replaced by one who was alert, observant, and ruthlessly efficient. He no longer sought to be invisible in a passive sense. He sought to be strategically invisible, to be in the right place at the right time. He volunteered for the tasks that would put him in proximity to the library, the study, the morning room, and any room where Lord Harrington might be entertained or where sensitive conversations might occur. He became a master of fading into the background, his ears open, his eyes missing nothing, his mind working with the precision of a seasoned strategist. He needed more than a single betting slip. He needed undeniable proof of Harrington's intricate scheme, ironclad evidence that could be presented and would stand up to scrutiny in any court, or more importantly, in the court of society. That evening, by the flickering light of a stolen candle in his cramped attic room, he penned a coded message to Phineas Giles, dispatching it with a trusted stable boy bound for the nearest village, with instructions for it to be sent by express rider to London. The instructions were precise. Giles was to employ the shrewdest private investigators in London, men who operated in the city's underbelly, who knew how to uncover secrets that polite society sought to bury. They were to dig into every aspect of Lord Harrington's life, his finances, his associates, his habits, his creditors. Specifically, they were to trace the ownership of the gaming hells where the Earl of Atherton lost his fortune. Andrew had a sickening feeling he knew what they would find. Over the next week, Atherton Manor became a chessboard, and Andrew, the disguised Duke, was its most vigilant player. He watched the agonizing dance between Harrington and the Dortneys. Harrington was the picture of solicitous concern, an ideal friend. He brought expensive gifts, a bottle of rare French brandy for the Earl, a first-edition book of poetry for Isabel, a delicate shawl for Beatrice. To the beleaguered family, these were gestures of profound friendship, acts of kindness from a loyal supporter. To Andrew, they were the calculated moves of a lone shark, tightening his grip, making his victims feel indebted to him in more ways than one. He observed Harrington's every interaction, seeking patterns, confirming his suspicions. He observed a conversation between the two men in the billiard room, where Andrew was ostensibly clearing glasses, moving with deliberate slowness. The air was thick with the scent of cigars and desperation. Another creditor, threatening legal action, Philip, the Earl lamented, his hand shaking as he lined up a shot, missing by a wide margin. Mr. Josiah Finch, he's relentless. Says he'll see me in Fleet Prison if I don't pay by the month's end. The Northwood settlement is weeks away, and even then, it won't be enough to cover everything. Harrington clucked his tongue in sympathy, though Andrew caught a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Dreadful business, Charles. But you mustn't worry. I may be able to speak with him. Finch owes me a favor or two from certain transactions. Perhaps I can persuade him to sell the debt to me. I would be a far more patient creditor than he, I assure you. I would not wish to see you publicly disgraced before Isabel's wedding. The Earl looked at him with pathetic gratitude, his eyes shining with desperate hope. Philip, you are a true friend. I don't know what I would do without you. A veritable godsend. Think nothing of it, Harrington said with a magnanimous wave of his hand, a chillingly practiced gesture. We must protect Isabel's future, after all. We cannot have a scandal erupting before the wedding. It would damage her prospects irrevocably. Andrew's hands tightened on the tray he held. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Harrington wasn't just acquiring the debt. He was doing it under the guise of friendship, making the Earl his willing accomplice in his own destruction. He was meticulously dismantling the Dortneys' defenses, one debt at a time, creating a scenario where he would appear to be the only possible salvation. He focused on Isabel too, but his perspective had been irrevocably altered. He saw the subtle ways she deflected Harrington's overly familiar touches, the polite but firm manner in which she ended their private conversations. He began to see that her coolness towards the man was not just propriety. It was a deep instinctual mistrust she couldn't quite articulate, a silent wariness towards a man who seemed too eager to help. She was a woman trapped, bound by duty to her family, and Harrington was the smiling jailer she mistook for a friend. Her composure was not indifference, but an act of profound self-preservation, a shield against the relentless pressures crushing her. His heart ached for her, a sensation both unfamiliar and profound. He had judged her so harshly, so quickly, in his own cynical pride. He had called her cold and calculating when, in fact, she was carrying a burden that would have crushed a lesser person, displaying a strength he had never witnessed in a woman of her station. The love she had for her sister, which he had seen in that brief, unguarded moment in Beatrice's room, was the source of her incredible fortitude. She was willing to chain herself to a cold, austere stranger, not for personal gain, but to save the person she held most dear. The realization filled him with a profound and humbling shame, a deep regret for his own arrogance and blind judgment. He now saw her as a tragic figure, a noble soul caught in a snare not of her own making, fighting a desperate battle alone. A reply from Giles arrived a week later, smuggled in with a delivery of fresh supplies from London, hidden inside a hollowed-out loaf of bread. Andrew read it by candlelight in his cramped attic room, the shadows dancing ominously on the walls. The investigator's report was chillingly thorough, confirming every one of Andrew's darkest suspicions, and then some. As he suspected, Lord Harrington held a secret controlling interest in two of the most notorious gaming hells in London, including the one that held the majority of the Earl's debts. He had been systematically fleecing Lord Atherton for over a year, using house players to drive up the stakes and ensuring the Earl always left with empty pockets and a heavier book of IOUs. The report detailed how Harrington had then bought the Earl's other outstanding debts from various creditors, men like the fictional Josiah Finch, at a fraction of their value, using a network of intermediaries to hide his true involvement. He now owned the Earl of Atherton lock, stock and barrel. The Atherton estate, its lands bordering Harrington's own, was the prize. Harrington himself was deeply in debt, his charming lifestyle a facade built on credit and speculation, his own finances teetering on the brink of ruin. His only path to solvency was to acquire the Atherton lands, and with them, a wealthy wife. The investigators surmised that his plan was simple, cunning, and ruthless. Wait until the last possible moment before the wedding to Northwood. He would then present the Earl with the mountain of consolidated debt, an impossible sum that no one could possibly pay. He would offer a single solution, break the engagement to the Duke and give him Isabel's hand in marriage. Her dowry, paid by the Duke as a settlement for the broken contract, combined with the Atherton lands, which would become Harrington's upon his marriage to Isabel, would solve all of Harrington's problems. He would have the land, the money, and the woman he coveted, all under the guise of saving her family from ruin. It was a trap years in the making, meticulously planned, and it was about to spring. Andrew folded the letter, his knuckles white against the paper, his jaw clenched tight. The sheer predatory evil of the plan took his breath away. Harrington wasn't just a villain. He was a spider who had spun his web with patience and poison, and Isabel and her family were about to be devoured. He knew he had to act, and soon. His disguise, which had begun as a tool for his own selfish quest for truth, had now become his greatest weapon. Harrington saw him as Alec, the witless footman, beneath contempt. The Earl ignored him. Even Isabel barely registered his presence, lost in her own silent battle. He could move through the house, listen, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. He would not reveal himself until he could do so in the most dramatic and destructive way possible for Lord Harrington. He had come to Atherton to observe a transaction. He would now stay to witness a reckoning. The storm that had been brewing over Atherton Manor for years finally broke on a tempestuous Tuesday night. Rain lashed against the window panes, and the wind howled like a banshee, a fitting soundtrack for the drama about to unfold. Andrew knew this would be the night. The Earl had received another threatening letter that morning, one Andrew was certain had been orchestrated by Harrington, detailing a final, impossible deadline for settlement. His nerve had finally shattered. He had summoned Harrington to the library for an urgent consultation. Isabel, her face etched with a dreadful premonition, her eyes wide with a fragile despair Andrew now recognized as courage, had also been requested to attend. Andrew ensured his duties, placed him in the library at that exact time, tasked with serving brandy and then discreetly remaining to tend the fire. Mrs. Davies, pleased with his silent diligence and improved efficiency, granted the request without a second thought. He entered the room to find the scene already set. The Earl was slumped in his chair, his face ashen, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Isabel stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, a pillar of defiant strength in a crumbling world, her eyes fixed on Harrington. Lord Harrington stood before the fireplace, radiating a confident, predatory grace, the firelight glinting in his calculating eyes. He held a sheath of papers in his hand, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "My dear Charles," Harrington began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, a thin veneer of concern over the hard core of his ambition. "Isabel, I'm so sorry it has come to this. I've done all I could to shield you both. My attempts to mediate with your father's creditors, to buy him more time. Alas, they have failed. What is this, Philip?" Isabel demanded, her voice, though quiet, cutting through the pretense like a finely honed blade. "What are those papers?" Harrington sighed dramatically, a performance perfected over weeks of manipulation. "They are your father's debts, my dear. All of them. I'm afraid in my attempts to protect him from his more aggressive creditors, I have acquired them all myself. It was the only way to prevent his immediate imprisonment." He spread the papers on the mantelpiece. A damning display of promissory notes and markers. The Earl groaned, burying his face in his hands, his body shaking with shame and fear. Isabel's back went ramrod straight, her breath catching audibly. "All of them," she whispered, the full weight of the words slowly dawning on her. "To the tune of £50,000, Harrington said, letting the number hang in the air like a death sentence, an impossible, crushing sum. "An amount, I'm afraid, that is well beyond your means, even with the Northwood settlement. The Duke's dowry, substantial though it is, would barely make a dent in this mountain of debt. And with Charles's reputation now so thoroughly ruined, no one in London would touch him with a barge pole." Andrew, standing in the shadows by the liquor cabinet, a silent, unmoving sentinel, watched Isabel's face. He saw the flicker of confusion, then the dawning, horrifying realization. This was not an act of friendship. This was a coup, a meticulously planned ambush. Her eyes, usually so composed, now held a raw, exposed terror. "What do you want?" she asked again, her voice dangerously quiet, stripped of all emotion, a chilling calm that bespoke a tempest raging beneath. "I have always wanted you, Isabel. You know that," Harrington said, taking a step closer, his eyes fixed on her with a possessive gleam that made Andrew's blood run cold. "The Duke of Northwood cannot make you happy. He's a cold, distant man who will see you as another of his possessions, a means to an heir. I, on the other hand, adore you. I would cherish you. I offer you genuine affection, not a transaction." He painted a seductive picture, a stark contrast to the loveless future Isabel had accepted. He laid his proposition out with chilling clarity, his words like poisoned honey. The Earl was to write to the Duke of Northwood immediately, breaking the engagement. It would cause a scandal, yes, but Harrington was confident the Duke, a man of such pride, would pay a substantial sum as a settlement to make it go away quietly, to avoid the public spectacle. That settlement, combined with the Dortney estate, which would become Harrington's upon his marriage to Isabel, effectively consolidating their lands, would clear all debts. It was a neat, brutal package. You would have me jilt the Duke, disgrace my family name, and marry you, the man who has engineered our ruin, Isabel asked, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, her eyes flashing blue fire. The realization of his betrayal was a physical blow, stripping away her composure. "I have not engineered your ruin, my dear. I have merely managed it," Harrington corrected smoothly, without a trace of remorse, his smile widening. "I'm offering you a lifeline, the only lifeline you have. Marry me, and your sister will have her physicians and her sea air. Your father will stay out of prison and retain his name, albeit under my patronage. and you will be the mistress of your own home, with a husband who truly values you, who knows your worth beyond a title. Think of the alternative, Isabel. Ruin, poverty, Beatrice is left without care. Is that truly what you desire? He reached for her hand, his fingers closing around her wrist, his touch a violation. Say yes, Isabel. It is the only sensible choice. Your only choice. This was the moment. The storm outside seemed to intensify, matching the fury building within Andrew. He had waited, listened, gathered his evidence. Now he would strike. I believe the lady has another choice. The voice, calm and laced with steel, came from the shadows. It was not the deferential tone of a servant. It was a voice of command, of absolute authority, a voice that carried the weight of generations of power. All three heads whipped around, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. They stared at the footman, Alec, who had stepped forward from the shadows, illuminated by the firelight. He had placed the brandy tray on a side table with a deliberate, almost dismissive gesture, and was now standing tall, his stooped posture gone, his shoulders broad and imposing. He looked directly at Harrington, and for the first time his grey eyes held the cold, unmistakable fire of a duke, a warrior's intensity. His entire bearing exuded an undeniable, formidable presence that brooked no argument. What is the meaning of this? Harrington sputtered, his face a mask of outrage, then confusion, then dawning horror. How dare you speak, servant? Get back to your place. Andrew ignored him, his gaze fixed on Isabel. Her face was a canvas of shock, confusion, and a dawning, mortifying horror as she looked at this man, this footman she had barely noticed, the man who had polished her silver and built her fires, and saw the unmistakable bearing of an aristocrat, of the Duke she had so contemptuously dismissed. She breathed, the words catching in her throat. Her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. Lord Harrington, Andrew said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register as he turned his full attention to the Baron, his gaze unwavering, cutting through Harrington like a sword. You have made one critical miscalculation. You assumed the Duke of Northwood was a stranger. You assumed he was not in this room, privy to your sordid schemes. He reached into his waistcoat, not the cheap livery, but the fine, tailored one he wore beneath, hidden from casual sight, and pulled out two items. The first was the folded betting slip he had found in the stables. The second was the detailed, incriminating report from his London investigators, bound with a red ribbon. He tossed them onto the table in front of Harrington, where they landed with a soft yet impactful thud. Beside the Earl's debts, these documents, Andrew continued, his voice resonating with cold authority, detail a systematic plot of financial ruin against the Earl of Atherton. They prove that you, Lord Harrington, hold a controlling interest in the establishments where he acquired his debts. They prove that you have been conspiring to entrap this family for the sole purpose of acquiring their land and Lady Isabel's hand against her will under duress. It is a matter, I believe, that would be of great interest not only to the authorities, who take a dim view of such predatory practices, but to every honourable member of the peerage, who would see your name utterly destroyed. Harrington's face had gone from florid red to a pasty white, the blood draining from it, leaving him looking like a ghost. He stared at the papers, then back at Andrew, comprehension and abject terror dawning in his eyes. You, Sterling? You are the Duke? He stammered, barely able to form the words. I am Andrew Sterling, the Duke of Northwood, Andrew confirmed, his voice like ice, each word a chisel chipping away at Harrington's composure. And you, sir, are a cheat, a predator, and a coward. You will release the Earl from every penny of this manufactured debt. You will sign over the markers to me immediately, without question or delay. In return, I will not see you transported or ruined entirely. I will merely ensure that your name is so thoroughly blackened in London society, in every club, every drawing room, every gaming hell, that you will be lucky to get an invitation to a dogfight. Your credit will be gone, your reputation destroyed, and your prospects evaporated. You will leave this house tonight, and you will never set foot in this county again. Am I clear, Lord Harrington? Harrington, utterly broken, his carefully constructed facade shattered, could only nod, his body trembling, his eyes wide with fear and defeat. The enormity of his exposure, the total collapse of his intricate scheme had rendered him speechless. Impotent, Andrew then turned to the Earl, his expression hardening, though a flicker of pity softened it momentarily. "And you, my lord," he said, his voice firm, "you will give me your daughter's hand as promised. But you will do so knowing that you are no longer in control of this family's destiny." "I am, and rest assured this house will be set to rights." Finally he faced Isabel. The fury in his eyes softened, replaced by a deep, aching regret, a profound vulnerability that surprised even himself. She was staring at him, her beautiful face pale with shock and humiliation. The man she had dismissed as a means to an end, the stranger she would endure, had been polishing her silver, lighting her fires, listening to her most private and desperate confessions. The shame of it was a palpable wave in the air between them, a thick, uncomfortable silence. "Your Grace," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. A fragile whisper, "Isabel," he said, and for the first time he used her name. Not as a command, but as a plea, a soft acknowledgement of her identity, of the person he had truly come to see. "We need to talk." The aftermath in the library was swift and brutal. Under Andrew's cold, unyielding gaze, a trembling Lord Harrington signed a confession and transferred all of the Earl's debts, the fabricated ones and the genuine ones he had bought, to the Duke of Northwood's name. He then fled Atherton Manor like the craven he was, disappearing into the stormy night and effectively out of polite society forever, his reputation irrevocably destroyed. He was truly ruined, his schemes undone by the man he had underestimated as merely a cold, austere stranger. The Earl, broken and shamed, retreated to his rooms, unable to face the man who had simultaneously saved and exposed him, leaving Andrew and Isabel standing alone in the grand, silent library. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of his deception and her desperate pronouncements. The fire he had built earlier crackled in the hearth, a lonely witness to the wreckage of their arranged betrothal, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mirror the turmoil in their souls. "You heard everything," Isabel stated, her voice barely a whisper, flat with shock and mortification. It was not a question. Her arms were wrapped around herself, as if to ward off a chill, though the room was warm. The humiliation radiated from her, a palpable aura of shame. "Yes," Andrew admitted, his own voice heavy with remorse, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "I did. Every word, the things I said about you, about our marriage." Her gaze was fixed on a worn patch of the Persian rug, unable to meet his eyes, the memory of her bitter pronouncements burning between them. "That I would endure you, that you were merely a means to an end, that I felt nothing for you." "I heard those things," he said softly, his voice devoid of accusation, filled only with regret. "And for a time I believed them. For that, for my unforgivable deception, I am truly sorry, Isabel. It was an arrogant, dishonorable thing to do. I came here consumed by my own pride and suspicion, eager to prove my cynical assumptions correct, and I failed to see the truth that was right in front of me." She finally looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with unshed tears, but also a flicker of something else, a dawning understanding, perhaps. "And what truth is that, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice still fragile. "The truth of a woman of incredible strength," he said, taking a hesitant step closer, his eyes earnest, vulnerable. "A woman willing to sacrifice her own happiness, to chain herself to a man she believed to be a cold stranger, all to save the people she loves. What I mistook for calculation was courage. What I judged as a cold heart was in fact a heart so full of love for her sister, for her family, that it had no room for anything else but duty and sacrifice." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, glittering in the firelight. "You carry a burden that few could bear with such grace and resolve. You should have hated me," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I did," he confessed, his honesty raw, his gaze unwavering. For a time I was hurt and angry, convinced I had been proven right. But then I truly saw you. Not Lady Isabel Dortney, the Athetherton Diamond, the potential Duchess, but just you. I saw you with Beatrice, with the music box, the depth of your devotion. I saw the crushing weight you carried, the quiet desperation behind your composure. And my contempt turned to a shame so profound it brought me to my knees, a shame that has consumed me for days. I was the cold one, Isabel, judging from a distance, unwilling to see the full truth. He had reached her now. Standing so close, he could see the flicker of the firelight reflected in her tear-filled eyes, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. He resisted the overwhelming urge to reach out and wipe away her tear. He had not earned that right. Not yet. The marriage contract is fulfilled, Isabel said, her voice regaining a sliver of its composure, though it still trembled, a faint echo of her former resolve. You have saved my family. I'm indebted to you, Your Grace. I will honor my part of the bargain. I will be the Duchess you require. I will do my duty. Andrew's heart sank, a familiar chill returning. She was retreating behind her mask of duty, the one he now understood so well, the only defense she knew. No, he said, shaking his head, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. That is not what I want. Not anymore. Her brow furrowed in confusion, the statement utterly unexpected. But the contract? Damn the contract, he said, his voice impassioned, a flicker of his soldier's temper breaking through. It was a document signed by two men who are gone, binding two people who did not truly exist, at least not to each other. I don't want the Duchess from the contract. I want Isabel, the woman who fights for her sister with every fiber of her being, who understands accounts better than my own steward, who has a rare, beautiful laugh when she thinks no one is watching. A laugh I've only heard a few times, but will never forget. He finally dared to reach out. Not to touch her, but to gesture to the space between them, to the chasm created by their deceptions and misjudgments. I release you, Isabel. The debts are settled. They are my wedding gift to you if you choose it. Whether you choose to be my bride or not, you are free. Your family is secure, their honor restored. You owe me nothing, neither duty nor gratitude. She stared at him, stunned into silence. This was not what she had expected. She had prepared for a life of dutiful servitude to a man she now knew she had grievously wronged, a man she had dismissed with such cruel words. She had prepared for a lifetime of atonement, of quiet sacrifice. She had not prepared for clemency. She had not prepared for grace. What? What do you ask then? She whispered, her voice barely audible, barely a breath. I ask for a chance, he said, his voice low and earnest, stripped of all ducal authority, of all pretense. To start again, not as a duke and a lady, not as a saviour and the indebted, and certainly not as a footman and his mistress, but as Andrew and Isabel. May I have the honour of courting you, Lady Isabel, properly this time? With no secrets and no masks, with no preconceived notions of what we should be, so that if one day you do agree to be my wife, you do so not out of duty or gratitude, but because you have found something in the man, not his title, that you cannot just endure, but perhaps even cherish, perhaps even love. The hope in his voice was fragile, but it was real. It was the hope he had almost extinguished in himself, the genuine longing for connection he had suppressed for so long. Isabel looked at the man before her, Andrew Sterling. She saw not the dreaded duke, nor the humble footman, but a man of honour, who had descended into the shadows to find a truth, and who had been noble enough to change his mind, to humble himself when he found it. A man who had seen her at her worst, heard her at her most desperate, and had not run. He had stayed. He had fought for her, not as a duke for his property, but as a man for a woman he had come to understand, to respect, and he dared to hope, to love. For the first time in years, a genuine smile, radiant and unburdened, lit up her face, chasing away the shadows of despair. The Athetherton diamond finally shone with its own light, reflecting a newfound freedom. "Yes, Andrew," she said, her voice clear and steady, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I would like that very much." I would like to know the man behind the title, just as you have come to know the woman behind the mask. And so, our story doesn't end with a grand wedding, but with something far more precious, a genuine beginning. Andrew Sterling, the Duke who posed as a servant, found the truth he was looking for, but it was the truth within himself that changed him forever. He learned that trust is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to overcome it, the willingness to look past facades and see the complex, beautiful, and often flawed reality beneath. And Lady Isabel Dortney, freed from her gilded cage of duty and the manipulative schemes of others, was finally able to seek a love based not on transaction, but on a shared truth, on mutual respect, born from the most unlikely of circumstances. Their path forward would be one of discovery, of learning to see the person behind the title, the heart behind the mask, building a future not on obligation, but on a foundation of genuine affection and unwavering understanding.